Welcome back everyone to another Tony Stewart Sprint Car Racing setup. In today's video, we're going to focus on the 410s at Five Forks Speedway. I absolutely love this track because the banking is indeed medium. It's not flat and it's definitely not high banks, but it is a very wide track giving a lot of room for racing and certainly multiple grooves. The fastest groove I have found is right out by the wall on the straights and then right down to the bottom in the corners. There is a lot of room here to race, so multiple grooves definitely available. And really the best advice I can give you about this track is do not overdrive the car, particularly on entry. Get out of the gas early, get the car rotated, get it to the bottom, and then you'll be able to gas it up nice and hard coming off the corner, and you should be able to make really good lap time. My quickest laps here are in the 11.20 range, maybe 11:20, 11:21. Something like that. So there is a lot of speed to be had here, even though there's not really a lot of banking. But again, the focus here, you just can't overdrive the corners. That's going to cause you to wash up the track in the center. You'll miss the apex and you will lose 2 to 3 tenths easy per lap by doing that. So focus on your entry to the corner and everything should be good. On the setup side of things, this is one of the looser setups that I have put on the channel simply because of the wide track and really a wide arcing entry into the corners. I needed a little bit more rotation out of the car here to get maximum speed. So that's what we're going to be looking at today. And of course, I'll be showing you different ways that you can loosen or tighten the setup based on your personal preferences. We'll start off with the shock values. 4s and 5s across the board with the exception of the right rear, which I always like to be about as soft as I can get it, simply because I wanted to get maximum traction whenever I'm on the throttle. As I've mentioned in previous setup videos, I prefer a softer shock number, anywhere from 3 to 5 generally. That's just my personal preference. If you want quicker transitions, a quicker feel out of the car, then by all means try higher numbers, 6, 7 or higher, and that will definitely give you a tighter, quicker feel out of the shocks. Moving on to the weight settings, maximum left side weight, minimum front weight. And the front weight is really the only one of those two that I would even consider adjusting. No reason to reduce the left side weight, but front weight, if you feel like the car is just too unstable, it's too loose, it rotates too much, then one of your options to tighten it up and make it more stable is to increase the front weight. Try going forward a couple of clicks to maybe around 39.0 or higher, and that should definitely tighten it up and give you more stability. Cross weight is at 52.5%, which I believe is the lowest cross weight that I've used so far in any setup here on the channel. And again, just like I mentioned before, with the wide arcing entries, I really need the car to rotate and get it pointed in the right direction while maintaining maximum speed and, scrubbing off the least amount of speed as possible in the corners. 52.5 works well for me. However, if you find that the car is too loose, then increase that cross weight number to around 53% or higher, and that will definitely tighten it up and slow down the transitions into and off of the corners. On the other side of things, if you feel like the car is just too tight, then the first thing I would actually recommend you do is ease into the corner more. Lift off the gas earlier on corner entry and make sure you get the car all the way to the bottom of the track in the corners and hit that apex. Otherwise, if the car is still too tight for you, then reduce that cross weight number down to around 51.5, maybe even 51. See how that feels to you. As far as the front and rear ride heights, basically all you want here is just don't bottom out. In the real world, these would amount for a bigger difference in handling than they do in the game, so don't worry a whole lot about those. I generally like to run the front a little bit higher than the rear, so that's why you see the 12.5 in the front versus 12.0 in the rear. If you find that the car is bottoming out, then by all means raise the front and or the rear to keep that from happening. Moving on next to the torsion bars, once again 0.95, which is the minimum on both the left front and left rear, and then a click or two higher than that on the right side. I like to adjust the handling. In fact, one of my favorite ways to adjust the handling is to adjust the difference in the left and the right side torsion bars. The smaller the difference between these two, particularly in the rear of the car. So as we move into the difference between the left rear and the right rear, the smaller that difference, the tighter the car is going to be under throttle, which of course will help you through the center of the corner and then on corner exit as well. If you want the car to be looser, then make this right rear torsion bar diameter bigger, and that will help to loosen the car on corner exit. So small 1 or 2 notch changes here can really make a big difference in the handling. Now, as far as preload, it is rare that I would ever use any preload on the left front or right rear, simply because I prefer different adjustments to try to accomplish the same thing. But on the right front preload, I tested up to about 2.0 here, so a huge change. Same thing in the left rear, and they worked. I wasn't quite as fast as the 11.2 that I mentioned earlier in the video, but I was still hitting consistently 3s, 4s, and 5s using substantial amounts of preload in the right front and the left rear. So again, play around with that. The right front, increasing the preload in the right front will tighten the car up on entry, make it more manageable, and slow down the rotation a little bit more. So if you're having trouble with being loose on entry, then try out the right front preload. For the exit of the corner, if you find that the car is just too loose for you, then increase the preload in the left rear, and that will tighten the car up under power on corner exit. Moving on to the tire pressures, and once again, I spent very little time here. You notice that both rear tires are at 4 PSI, but again, this is a very minor change for me. Any number of different values would have worked just fine. Finally, the miscellaneous settings: maximum left rear spacing, maximum right rear spacing. If you're looking to loosen the car up, then you want to use higher numbers on the right rear spacing and lower numbers on the left rear spacing. If you're looking to tighten the car up, then you'll want to increase the number you're using in the left rear and decrease the number in the right rear. So those are some options you can use for the wheel spacing. But again, maximums on both left rear and right rear work very well for me and give me the feel and the performance that I'm looking for. Brake bias, this is something that I like to use quite a bit at this track in order to get the car rotated on entry. And because I use the brakes, and it's just basically it's just a tap, just a little bit of brake serves to rotate the car. 45% works very well there and allows me to be in the gas nearly the entire lap. I am off the gas maybe a second for the entire lap, counting both corners of the track, but it's not much at all. So a slight use of the brake on entry, 45% allows the car to rotate while not over-rotating for me. But if you need the car to rotate more under braking, then you want to reduce the brake bias down to around 43, 40, and so on. And if you find that the car under brakes is just too loose, then increase this number to around 47 or 50 or even higher, and that will certainly tighten the car up under braking. Both front and rear wings maxed out at 30 degrees because I wanted all the grip I could get, and I didn't find any reason to think that drag was a huge issue in slowing down the car on the straightaway, so maximum wings it is. Rear wing positioning, this is a great way to tighten up the car if you just find that the car is either unstable or is just simply too loose. Increase this number. Right here I'm using 0, so no offset at all. But increasing the amount of negative number you're using here, -1, 2, 3, and so on, will certainly tighten the car up. Wheel lock is at 10 degrees, which is pretty standard for me. In fact, there's very little reason for me to adjust that simply because I prefer that feel from the steering wheel. If you're looking for a little bit slower feel out of the steering wheel, a little slower reactions from it, then you'll want to lower this number to 9, 8, 7, whatever. If you're looking for the opposite, if you're looking for a quicker steering feel, then you'll want to increase this number to 12, 13, 14, up around and closer to the default, which is around 17 or 18 at most every track. And then finally, we get to the steering offset using 1.50 versus a stagger of 20.0 inches. Normally, I would use a little bit more steering offset here, but it just felt better to use a slightly lower value. Normally, I would, based on the stagger of 20, I'd be somewhere around 1.75 on the steering offset. I tried it, it worked fine, but didn't quite feel the way I wanted it to, so that's why I backed it down to 1.5. And then moving on to the stagger, this is the maximum 20.0, and that's because I wanted maximum rotation in the car. I wanted the car to pull hard to the left because I didn't have a lot of banking to rely on as we've had in some of the other tracks we've covered. So I wanted the car itself to want to rotate very freely, and that's why I'm using that maximum. If you want to tighten the car up, if you want it not to pull quite so hard, while you're on the track, then simply lower this to something like 16 or 17, and you should notice a big difference in how tight the car becomes. Finally, this is something that I mentioned this at every track, that there is a lot of adjustability in this rear end ratio. This track probably more so than some of the others that we have covered, because the 5.2 you see here is not the highest number that I have used. I've used up to, I believe, 5.4 and ran great laps with that. So anywhere from about a 5.1 to a 5.4, maybe even a little higher than that. And you can really turn a lot of RPMs. But again, a lot of that's going to be based on how you drive the car, how you use the throttle, on and off the throttle versus how you use the brakes. So as always, a lot of adjustability. Hopefully this will help you out in your journey to find more speed. That's do it for today. Thank you very much for joining me. And stay tuned for more Tony Stewart Sprint Car Racing.